There's a sefer that now America's gave out officially, recently, but the sefer's been around for a while. They call it Sefer Zachrenes Chelik Shlishi. The Frierdiker Rebbe has 2 volumes of memoirs, right? Sefer Zachrenes, the Zachrenes of Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Sefer Zachrenes, what I read as a child, is about Lubavitch. It's about Lubavitch. It's about the city of Lubavitch more than it's about the Chassidus of Lubavitch. There was a Yid who was a writer. His name was David Leib Mekler. I don't know who this man was, but the Frierdiker liked him. The Leib God, and he trusted him. He Mistama came from Chassidim. I read a biography of his in the introduction to the third Krach. He had a shaykhs to Chassidim, had a real Chassidish neshama, and he used to write the memoirs. The way the previous Rebbe, what do you need? The seltzer. The way the previous Rebbe prepared the memoirs was, the Rebbe wrote in Hebrew. It was called the Rishimas Lubavitch. They had it, they lost it, I don't know what the deal is. They had it, they don't have it, it's a whole bunch of... Ich hab gesehen Rishimas Lubavitch und Heinz sagt, man kann ihn nicht gefunden. Ich weiß, wie das ist eigentlich. It calls Rishimas Lubavitch. He wrote in Hebrew. The Frierdiker Rebbe did Bekitzer, Nekudis. And this Leib Mekler took the Hebrew from the Frierdiker Rebbe and Übergeschrieben of Yiddish, and he dramatized it. Et gemacht von a Wort a Quart. In other words, it's not he translated the Hebrew into Yiddish, he made a story out of it. But the Frierdiker put the Sibbe cooking. After he would make it into a story, that would edit it. I don't know if that means that every single word in the Sefer Zachrenes is a historic fact, Beruach HaKodesh and Frierdiker Rebbe or not. But that's the story of the memoirs. I read the memoirs as a child. And it's very frustrating. The memoirs finish. You know what the last page of the memoir says? The Alter Rebbe was born. You never get to Lubavitch. Arum. I mean, if you know the story, the personality that occupies, that takes up most space in memoirs is the Alter Rebbe's father, Reb Baruch. But it doesn't start with Reb Baruch. It starts much earlier. With Reb Binyamin, the Tzaddik Nister, and Reb Zavov, the Tzaddik Nister. It goes back till the founding of the shtetl, the start from Menschen Liebe, the city of brotherly love. So this is the Metzias. Now, the Frierdiker Rebbe was here 10 years earlier, 1929, 1930. And most of the time that he was here, he was in New York. He traveled a lot, but his center was here in New York. And he met this David Leib Mekler then, the first time. And I don't know how the Rishimas were done. In other words, they write in the Hakdam of this third Krach. Now Americans gave it out official with a Shteibel. We had it years ago, Fatziel. Now they gave it out mamish with a Shteibel, with good ha'aris, very good ha'aris. You know, to work on the Frierdiker Rebbe stories, you have to be, it's a job. Because the Frierdiker Rebbe has a lot of stidus. And you have to know how to be mitzayin and what to be mitzayin and what to talk about. It's done very well. I mean, the people who did it know what they're doing. They wissen sehr gut and they verstehen sehr gut. And it's done very respectfully, versteht sich. But some people say that Asha gave over the stories. It looks to me like the Frierdiker Rebbe told him stories. This third krach of Zachrenes, which was actually written 10 years earlier, is about the Rabbeim. It's about Lubavitch. But the Alter Rebbe, the story with the war with Napoleon, there's some stories that are not known from any source other than there. Then the Middle Rebbe goes till the Rebbe Rashab, Askonis. If you read that Sefer, if anybody's read it, I read it this winter. It's been out for a while, but I read it this winter. When you read this volume, it's not the history of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim. It's not. It's the history of the Askonis of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim. Of the Askonos. In other words, the Chassidus and the Torah and Avodah, it's there. But the thrust of these articles, which then became chapters in a book, is to speak specifically to the Askonos Tziburas, the public service of the Lubavitcher Rebbeim. I don't know if you are aware that in Tov Shin Yud Aleph, right away, the Rebbe gave out a kuntres in Yiddish and I forgot what it's called, but my shwager, Avram David, at Arbeit Americas, he knows about it, where the Rebbe wrote a pamphlet to show that all the Rabbeim from the Alter Rebbe, there wasn't a Chabad Rebbe who thought only about himself and his Chassidim. All the Rabbeim were involved in Askaras. All the Rabbeim worried about Yidden in the whole world, and especially Yidden in Russia, and they were Mesa Nefesh for it. And when you read this volume of Zechrenis, that's the story that you get. It's not. It goes through 5 generations of Lubavitch. I don't think it has that much of Frierdiker Rebbe. In the Sofas, they print the Yisurim from the Lubavitch and Rebbe in Rusland. In the back of the book, they printed a pamphlet, the suffering of the Lubavitch Rebbe in Soviet Russia. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote that himself. It came out anonymously, as if it was written by some writer, but the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote himself. The Yisurim came out in 1930, came right away. The Yisurim from the Lubavitch Rebbe in Yiddish. It's a Vetch in Rusland. It's the Hisaf of this Sefer. And he goes through the Rabbeim, and it's interesting. You don't realize how much the Mittel Rebbe, Gitan Askaris, Mittel Rebbe was a malach. He was Chamat in this world. But you see how much he did for Yiddishkeit. Pasha to help people with Parnasa. Pasha bepashtas. Anyway, I'm telling you so to make a point. That you see this in the Hayom Yom. In the Hayom Yom, in the beginning of the Hayom Yom, you have a brief biography of each one of the Rabbeim. The Rebbe wrote it. Our Rebbe wrote it. It's based on things written from Frierdiker Rebbe. But there's also a bent, a leaning towards Askonis. In other words, obviously a Rebbe is an Eved Elokim, and the Rebbe is Megalated and Avodah. But there are some entries in the Hayom Yom you don't understand until you read this volume of Zechrenis. In a sense, things that you don't know why they're so important, you need to understand the spirit of it. It's based on the Rabbeim's involvement in public service, push to help people. So one of the stories I have in this book, and I apologize, I'm very tired. My tank is pretty empty, so I don't have enough. My cup arbeit nicht. So I'm not a little more alcohol. Yeah, exactly what I need. But I'm formatted. So my memory is not so strong. B'chol, my memory is not so good, but especially now. But they have in the book a whole story about a fabrik in Dubrovnik, a factory in Dubrovnik, Pasha to provide jobs for Fruma Yidden. To provide jobs for Fruma Yidden. And it's in the Hayom Yom, I think. I'm almost positive. And the Rebbe Rashab, I think that employed 5,000 people, which is a lot of people. The Rebbe Rashab organized with some rich Balabatim, the Yiddish mention, that they should build a factory to whatever it didn't matter what they were producing, it doesn't really matter what. It says, but I don't remember, to provide Yidden and Parnasa. But the tragedy of it is that who owned these factories? And who built these factories? Rich Yidden. Baron Ginsberg, if I don't know that. Baron Ginsberg. These are very powerful people. They were not from at all. And the story was that Rebbe Rashab is soliciting these men to build businesses specifically for the purpose of providing from a Yid with Parnasa. And Bobby Shaw, at the same time, on a different page in the newspaper, he's fighting a war with this guy about Shitta, about the ideology. So the way the story ends is the guy finally says, you know what? You're fighting with me. I'm closing the factory. You asked me to do you a favor. I should give you Parnasa, and now you're fighting with me about Shittas. And the Rebbe wouldn't budge. The Rebbe Rashab would not budge. Meaning, he was very concerned with the Parnasa of Yidden, but he was not going to do it at the expense of a principle that he held, whatever the Milchamas were. You could look in the book, you could see. But I read it, and I'm thinking to myself, if only he wasn't such a principled person, a little bit, Nein! He's soliciting a Freie Yid. He's asking him, do him a favor, open a factory that he didn't need, from a Yid Rabbanasa, and he's fighting with this guy on another front, Milchamas Mitzvah, Milchamas Tnufa, Milchamas Nitzachon. And the guy says, you know what? Forget the factory. Why should I help you? You're fighting. And the factory closed. Kachava. And then everything back off. He didn't back off. I'm using it as a dogma of the I read it, it's just so upsetting. It's pushing, it hurts you, you know. The Rebbe tried to help people, but he couldn't. Why? He's never religious. You know? I knew a Yid whose name was Rebbe Levitansky. You know, his joke was, he really means it. You know, he used to make fun of people. He was, of course, the best example of it. And made this Nebuch mit Anemis. You know the story with Moshe Feller and Velvel Green? It's like a Valda Kamaisa. I'm not going to tell you the story now. But in the Kudas to see if it was, Moshe Feller made an appointment with Velvel Green and spent the entire appointment davening mincha. When he walked out of the appointment, Velvel Green calls up his wife, and he says to his wife, Gail, I found one. I found one. So his wife says, what do you mean you found one? He says, I found a Jew. So she says to him, what do you mean you found a Jew? We're Jewish. He says, no, a Jew like the Jews in the book. They belong to a Jewish book club. And 2 months before, they read a book, a whole bunch of Yidden, not Shem Torah Mitzvah. They were, 60 years ago, Freie Yidden then were more Jewish than Frumme Yidden are now. I hate to say it. They were very Jewish, you know, in their gefühl. And they read a book on Tach V'Tat. On the program, but you had it, hundreds of thousands of Yidden. Al Kiddush Hashem. And they gave him a choice. The cross or the sword. And whole communities, Ad Echad. Now one person was Mekadesh Shem Shemayim Barabim. They died on Kiddush Hashem. So when these secular Jews, these young, modern Jewish intellectuals read this book, versteht sich, they were very moved. It's upsetting. And especially they talking now, they read the book 60 years ago, it was so close to the war. And they had a vikuach, a discussion, are there such Jews alive today? And they all agreed that there's no such Jews anymore. When Moshe Feller walked out of the office, thinking he's never going to see Velvel Green again, because he just ruined the whole appointment with his mincha, he calls up his wife and he says, I found one. She says, what do you mean you found one? He says, I found, like the book, a Yid wird sterben for mincha. You know, this story of Velvel Green and Moshe Feller, the Rebbe said by a Farbrengen, publicly, when both of them were present. It was so, you know how careful the Rebbe is. The Rebbe didn't say the names. Moshe Feller was sitting in front of him, and Velvel Green was standing behind him. The Rebbe told the story in detail, in their presence. It's Amoid in the Kamaisa. It's Amoid in the Kamaisa. Anyway, Dugma Poshet of the principle of the Rebbe. Let me give you a Deir Shvi example. It's a crazy example. I mean, there's no shortage of examples, but this is an example which is rather over the top. The first shliach of the Rebbe to Morocco was the Bechol Lipsker, Allah Shalom. Now I'm too stupid for politics, really. I'm even too stupid to be stupid about politics. But apparently, the Bechol Lipsker was a shliach to one city called Meknas, and that's what he did. The second shliach was the Shteibel Matasov. And all the shliachas in Morocco was him. He was all over the country. In other words, he was sent to Casablanca, but Lapel, Mitzudose Prusa Kola Medina. He really was, he was the second shliach, but if you will, at least that's the book that they published, he was the head shliach. In his height, he had 60 yeshivas, 60 schools. Some of those schools had hundreds of kids, and some of the schools were a hole in the wall with 4 kids and an excuse me teacher who would show up to class when he wasn't doing his other jobs, you understand? But so what happened was there was the joint, which was in Europe, and Benjamin Gardeski Shalom, whose son Shalom Ber is davened here. He was the Rebbe's man. He was the Rebbe's Bokeach. I don't know if Benjamin gets his biography of Benjamin Gardeski. The Rebbe said to Benjamin Gardeski, "Du bist mein Bokeach. Du weißt was meint as du bist mein Bokeach. As du redst red ich." The Rebbe told him, you should know you're my Bokeach. You stand in my place. You have my strength. You know what I mean? When you speak, I'm speaking. And he was a Cheverman Gadol B'Yosef. He raised so much money. He raised millions and millions and millions of dollars. He supported not just North Africa. A lot of his money ended up a lot of it ended up in Americas. I heard that there was a period of time that the Rebbe had no money, and the only money coming into the Americas in New York was Benjamin Gardeski's money, which was earmarked for North Africa, and somehow they arranged that a little bit of it should stay here. I mean, the Rebbe didn't pocket the money exactly, but it's nicht gewen kein Geld. Anyway, so the joint was paying the bills. The joint. I don't know the full name of the joint of organizations that help Yidden. They were not from people at all. They were good Jews. We had Yiddish Hetzim, they got, but they were not from. And they wanted things to look good. They wanted to be able to put a picture in a paper. They wanted it to look good. Come up on it. So there was a standing argument between the joint and the Rabbi Gardetsky, but Rabbi Gardetsky used to come and visit, you know. The Shlomo Matasov was Al-Assad, and Shlomo Matasov was getting hirash from the Rebbe. He was getting hirash from New York. And whatever the Rebbe said went. It was that simple. And this is going to sound very bad, but the Rebbe didn't mind if the chinuch wasn't the best. But the school has to stay open, you know. People say the school's not good, close the school. A Yiddish kid has to give Yiddish chinuch. You can't give him the best chinuch. A Jewish child belongs in a Jewish school. Okay, so the school is missing this, the school is missing this, but a Jewish child belongs in a Jewish school. You should know that today, as we are sitting here in Los Angeles, there are frum boys and girls learning in public school, kipshutei, because the parents cannot afford to pay tuition. I go to LA probably once a year. It's the Rebbe Rayatz is turning over his Rebbe. The Rebbe would have given his left hand for one kid to learn in a yeshiva. And he was talking about money. Mit Poshet wegen Geld. Poshet wegen Geld. Why? Because the school has to be kach v'kach. And the school has to charge so many $1,000 tuition because you have to buy the kids with this and this and this and this and this and this. And remember, if you can't afford, what I don't know, $30,000, $40,000 per child in tuition, the kid can't go to school. It's a himmel geshrei. So it won't be such a good school that it won't have all the wells, as if these whistles and bells exactly raise superhuman beings. Where are all these geniuses who went to these exclusive schools where they got so much attention and the girls were taught Gemara with Mefarshim? Where are these geniuses? I don't know exactly where they are. But the Rebbe didn't care. A Jewish child needs a Jewish education. And if you can't have the best school, so second, but your kid has to go to a Jewish school. And the Rebbe, mit es gebrennt bis mit nefesh. So he had 60 schools in Morocco. So in big cities, they had hundreds of children. And they had teachers and they had classrooms. I mean, if you know the work of the Lubavitch in Morocco, they built Batei Sefer L'Moidim and L'Moides. I mean, the Rebbe sent maybe 20 people to Morocco. Shluchim. But those 20 people influenced hundreds of thousands of Jews. Tens of thousands of kids, because they would raise the local people, the local talent became the teachers. They trained them to be teachers. They trained them to be teachers for girls and for women. And it was a project that was done. It was done very thoughtfully, you know, on a shoestring budget, and they were able to give chinuch. So in big cities, you had real schools, but in Shtetl, you had 6 kids who were going to cheder, 6 in a classroom. The Rebbe had no money. All of these teachers were teaching in Hayas schools. You know what that means? The Freie sent, Sephardic Yidden and the Tmimim. Sephardic Jews were always from. They were very traditional. And the Europeans came and they built schools. But there was a worm in those schools. Or they didn't come out and say, we're going to make it an apokeitis. They're just a little cold water. It's a little. And they built schools. These organizations sent people from Europe to North Africa, and they were stealing their soul. They were stealing from Fardim, their neshama. A lot of the people who worked with Shlomo Matasov were teachers in the Hayas, but in the Hayas they got paid. But Shlomo Matasov they didn't get paid. So when did they come to school? When they had nothing else to do. Why? Because they had a real job that was paying them. But when they worked for Shlomo Matasov, they worked according to his rules. And the joint was upset with, what's this? They came to him and said, we'll build you 3 schools. We'll build you a building with classrooms, with blackboards, with desks, with notebooks, with pens. We'll even provide the kids with shoes. But we're not going to have a school in a derf with 4 kids that the teacher only shows up when he doesn't have another job. And the whole thing is b'di'evet. And the Rebbe wanted these schools. The Rebbe wanted these kids to go into these holes in the wall. It wasn't like the Rebbe didn't mind that it was b'di'evet. But the Rebbe felt a Jewish child belongs in a Jewish school. The worst Jewish school is better than a public school. They have to be around Yiddishkeit. And this was a war that the joint fought with Lubavitch in Morocco. So the Matasovs printed a book, about their father, with a lot of documents. In other words, they didn't just write a book. It's to put it in plain English, it's an incredibly boring book because it's not a story. It's everything has to be proven to be true. In other words, if you want a book that's credible, you have to write a book that no one can read. And that's the kind of book it is. It's very hard to read but it's very precise. It's very technical, and you see documents that all corroborate the whole thing. Bottom line is that a big fight. What was the fight? The Rebbe wanted chinuch al Kodesh in Morocco. The Rebbe wanted that the Lubavitcher Chadara was called Oyo Yosef. The Lubavitcher should have no limud echol, no English, whatever it was, French. And of course, the people paying the bills were not even from. They didn't understand this. How can you not have French? I had Shlomo Matasov stood his ground. Why? Because that's the year that they got from New York. And they made all kinds of deals. They sent a frum member. They found one frum guy in the whole joint. He should go negotiate with Shlomo Matasov because he's a frum guy, so Shlomo Matasov may be not so averse. He'll listen to his reason. They told him like this: we'll build you 3 buildings, gorgeous schools, and in 3 big cities, and you'll be able to give education to many Jewish children. But we're shutting down all the mom and pop. We're shutting down these other 57 lacher. And Shlomo Matasov said, B'shum ofen, every child who wants Jewish education is going to get one. As compromised as he is, he's going to go to a cheder and learn something. And the argument went on for 2 years. And they kept on saying, if you don't cooperate, we're shutting down the pipeline. There's going to be no money. They paid probably 80% of the hitah. I mean, Lubavitch had no money. In the early 50s, mid-50s, no geld. The money was the joint's money. And he's fighting with them. A ditzach b'zeh. Principle. Why? He got us from New York. Finished. So they kept on reducing their demands. The whole thing is hysterical. You hear in America they say there's the mayor the day, and over here Shlomo Matasov he had nothing, and he's arguing with them and fighting, and they make one concession after another after concession. So the final concession was, listen to this: they'll agree to everything. He can keep open all 60 schools, and like most of them were not really schools, they were. And he only wants one rule. Listen to this: he's not allowed to take counsel for his schools from overseas. That's the only rule. Why? Because they knew that the only person crazy enough to fight with them on this, the Rebbe knows they're paying the bills. The Rebbe was nice, it was respectful, but he wasn't going to bend his principle for their money. You're going to give me money on my terms. When you're in a shite, I don't agree with you. Look, the Rebbe didn't say, I dare you not to give. He couldn't afford to say that. But he said, we're going to, and he won 100%. They gave in to all the demands. The story, when you read this in the book, it's so crazy. It's really so crazy. And what was the issue? The big issue was limud echol. How many schools in America did Lubavitch have with limud echol? How many schools in America did they have where the Rebbe was instrumental in establishing the limud echol? The Rebbe wanted the limud echol, they wanted a good limud echol. Every place has different rules. You know, it's not one size fits all. In America, there were certain places where the Rebbe said it's not enough to have limud echol; it has to be good. But in Morocco, the Rebbe held has to be taras hakodesh. How the Rebbe makes that judgment, it's not the pshat that this is social science. This is a Rebbe. This is Al-Kus. This is the nekudah, you know, where you make a judgment that you cannot base it on reason. It's a nekudah that comes from atzmus, mamish. And this is a story of Americana Mesiras Nefesh. I mean, in our generation, what exactly is Mesiras Nefesh? What's Mesiras Nefesh for us? What's Mesiras Nefesh? What's Mesiras Nefesh in America? What's Mesiras Nefesh in America? The Rebbe said, "B'kasas lamoyer." Right, the mind of Atat Tzav, Yikoy Lecha, Mesiras Nefesh. Shlomo told me, Shlomo Galper told me, no, not Shlomo Galper. Oh, I'm not going to tell the story correctly. I don't remember saying. Leibel Shapiro's Harav Leibel Shapiro, Rabbi. He was in Russia. A mice with a lady in a mikveh. I forgot the details of the story, but it was a story of a lady in a mikveh. And I don't remember. I met a woman. I'm mixing up stories. and because I don't remember, but there's a lady who came to my classes for a while. She was Russian born. She was born in Russia. I'm not going to say her name because you'll know who she is. Her mother was an orphan. Her mother was a Yosema because of the Holocaust. And she was raised by her Zayda. Her Zayda was a Tammuz. She's come to my classes in 770. I know this woman. In other words, what I'm telling you, I heard personally, but I don't remember all the the details. But it was during the war. And her great-grandfather said to her mother, we have to think about a shidduch. And her mother said to her grandfather, how could I get married? So he said, why can't you get married? You know, we spoke Yiddish kind of chasna machen, Yiddish shtub. So she said to her, du hast mit mir gelernt wegen mikveh. She said to her Zayde, you taught me a Yiddish word again in mikveh. We have no mikveh. So they built a mikveh in their house. And the mikveh was functional for a while. In other words, the Einokol had gepoiled bam Zayden, a young girl born Mistama after the revolution, but her Zayda had got of it. They built a mikveh. So she told me, this lady came to my classes, that she visited the place where her mother lived as a child. And she came to the apartment and she looked around and she said to the Goyim living there, behind this wall there's a secret room. And they said, no, bishul mei vernisht. I'm telling you, anyway, bottom line is, they had closed up the mikveh. The government came and closed up the mikveh. She was able to find the mikveh. She was able to show them where the mikveh had been. But she said to me that when they came from Russia, they say 50 years ago, 1970, a little more than 50 years ago, so there was an Sheikh Chabad convention, and the Rebbe sent her mother to speak about Taras Mishpacha, in Rusland. But there was an expression from the Rebbe to somebody. The Leib Shapiro came back from Russia with also a story about a mikveh tahara, Mesilas Nefesh for mikveh. And the Rebbe wrote a note, L'saper ezeh lebale ha-Mesilas Nefesh dekan, or something like that. This story has to be told to the American Bale Mesilas Nefesh. We of course, we're all Mesilas Nefesh. And the Rebbe says, tell this story. Leib Shapiro, years ago, the Leib Shapiro every day used to put out a broadcast. I don't know if you heard him. He put out hundreds of stories that are priceless. I don't know, he ran out of material, his kids ran out of patience. But every day he had a new story. He did it for several years. It's hundreds and hundreds. But one of them was that Rebbe wrote a note about Mesilas Nefesh from Mikveh Tan in Russia to tell the story to the American about Mesilas Nefesh. Shteibel Galperin told me a story that his father, when they came from Russia, they moved to Nachas Chabad. And the Rebbe paid for them to come to the Rebbe the first time. The first time they came to the Rebbe paid the Eitzos. And I'm sure you've read these things, that the Rebbe wanted that the Russians should be with him on the bimah by Tia Shefer. You know that? The Rebbe wanted, if you remember Moshe Pinchas making the announcements, and then Shia Pinchas made the announcement, but he would announce that you shouldn't come up onto the bimah unless you're invited. On the bimah was by invitation only. So who was on the bimah? All the Gaboyim, and 770 had many Gaboyim. Some of the Gaboyim only showed up for Rosh Hashanah for Tkis, never knew they were Gaboyim B'chlal. And the Maskiris, Label and Binyamin and Avchadakov and whoever was in the Maskiris, when he was here, Nissim Mendel was up on the bimah. And then there were Nikuvim B'Shem, individual people that Rebbe wanted. One of the people that Rebbe wanted with him on the bimah always was Rebbe Mendel Futafas. Now, the Rebbe didn't tell me why. But his grandson told me, Rabbi, he said, teacher Al-Teda, Shlomi Futafas, that the last few years his grandfather Pasha couldn't walk. And he had to push through the whole shul because the Rebbe wanted him with him by Tkiyas. And so he got up on the bimah and he sat down on one of those stools. In the back of the bimah, there's two seats on either side where the people who do Hagba hold the Sefer Torah. And by the way, I just want to say something. It's a shtick of mine. If you get the maftir, I don't think it's correct to turn your back to the Sefer Torah. If the person who does Galila, Hagba, is sitting directly behind you, you don't stand with your back to the Sefer Torah. The Rebbe stood on the bimah, but the Sfarim were to the side. The chairs were made in such a way that when you stand at the bimah, turning your back. You can't turn your back to Sefer Torah. You can't do it. I mean, I saw many El Chayidin, they say them after on the side. This is why. You don't want to turn your back to Sefer Torah. But in 770, the chairs were on the side. So Mendel finally climbed up on the bimah. He was very old, and he plopped down one of those chairs, and he sat. And of course, they did a Hag B'Glila, one Sefer Torah, whatever it was. Bottom line is, the Rebbe did the maftir, and the Mendel was sitting there. Shteibel told him he was with him, with his Zayda. Before the Rebbe started a Chanel Kiyas, the Rebbe turned around and motioned to the Mendel Futafas, come close. I want you near me by the Kiyas. So, I mean, the Mendel was something else. I remember as a child, I mean, for those of us who are Americans, the first time I heard the word Yamed, Harav Menachem Mendel, Ben Harav Menachem Mendel. Mendel Futafas always got Aliyah Rosh Hashanah. One of the 2 days, he always got Aliyah Rosh Hashanah. And I turned to my father, Menachem Mendel, Ben Harav Menachem Mendel, and my father had to tell me that he's named after his own father. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about death. Nobody that I knew had died, Harav Menachem Mendel. And the impression that it makes, the Rebbe wanted him on the bimah. But when the Rosh Hashanah came, the Rebbe wanted the Rosh Hashanah on the bimah. The first few years, so there's a story that goes around that the Rebbe turned to Label, Groner, Olav Shalom, and said to him, they were Vyshetsky brothers. They were teenagers. They were 16 and 17 years old. They had come from Russia. And they didn't go up on the bimah. Why? They need to be on the Rebbe's bimah. And the Rebbe, after Mafte, before Tkiyas, says to Label, who is Vyshetsky? And the Rebbe would not start a Chol Tkiyas till a 16-year-old bocher who had come from the Soviet Union. Maybe he was more than 16. I don't know, maybe he was 20. I don't know what it was. But they were kinder. They were not old Chassidim with white beards. The Rebbe wouldn't start preparing for Tkiyas Shefer till the Rosh Hashanah given him up for the bimah. Anyway, so he told me, Shleimer, the Rebbe paid for all of them to come to the Rebbe the first time. And by the Rebbe was a very big, there's sichos. The Rebbe proposed, when they came from Russia in the late 60s, 70s, that every Yid who comes from Russia should spend their first year learning. And the Rebbe said, Ich has halten. The Rebbe was prepared to create a fund that the Yidden who came from Russia, who lived life of Mesiras Nefesh, and a lot of them were Pashut people, they never had a chance to really learn. They should sit for the first year after they come to Tzol, they should sit a whole day on learning. And the Rebbe would say, there's sichos, in the Teres Menachem, you can see it in the sichos. Upon him, I don't know who didn't want, but it didn't really happen. But anyway, so they came to the Rebbe. The Rebbe paid for them to come to the Rebbe. So, but they didn't know protocol. They didn't know the Halach Yelech of 770. The Rebbe came every day 10 o'clock. So he told me, Shleimer, that his father and his older brother were standing in front of 770, and they were talking to an old friend. I mean, to imagine that seer, they came from Russia in the early 70s, late 60s, and they met friends they hadn't seen in literally 25 years. But they had been in Gehenna. The joy to meet the old Chavedim, it was an unbelievable thing. So they were standing right in front of 770, and they were talking to an Americana Chassid who had been in this country since the late 40s or early 50s, he was his father's friend from Amol, and they had gotten out right away, and now 20-something years later, they came out of Russia. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a book about Rav Zalman Leib Stulin. The Rav Leib Stulin was a very great man. He was a big Talmud Chochem, he was a big Chassid. When the door slammed shut, when there was no longer an opportunity to leave, a lot of people were mamish at the threshold of leaving, and they got stuck on the wrong side of the border. So his wife, she was from home abroad. She was Chaskel Brod's sister. She was very upset. Whatever, the particulars are not important, but she was really upset that for whatever reasons they were not able to get out, and if this one had done this, and this one had done this one they could have gotten out, and whatever the reason, she was very, very upset. So her husband said to her, they went with a train. We're going to travel with an airplane. That was what he told his wife. 20 years later, Uvir, the Russian organization for immigration, let them leave. So of course it was a big simcha, and they had to sell all their belongings, they had to pack up what they were taking, and she says to her husband, remember, we're going by plane. And he says, really, is that important? Or is it important? She says, you gave me your word, we're going to keep it. And they flew. They flew. She wouldn't give in. They had to fly out of Russia. I waited 20 more years. And it's in his biography. I think they're called Gone V'Chosid. They made a biography by the The story is in there. But in any case, so they came to the Rebbe, and they were standing in front of 770, and the Rebbe came. Drove his car, drove up. So the American Chosid they were talking to knew that at 10 o'clock the Rebbe comes. So as the Rebbe's car was driving up, he disappeared. They didn't know the protocol. They ended up standing right in the Rebbe's path. They would get out of the car, and they were right in his way, and they felt very embarrassed. And this other guy, he didn't tell them to move away. He ran away himself and left them standing there like I saw Lazazel. So Rebbe turns to the guy who ran off and says to him, Wie gefällt dir, wie sie seine Neues gewachsen? Rebbe turned to him and said, you think you're going to escape? How impressed are you in the way they grew up? Wie gefällt dir, wie sie seine Neues gewachsen? Anyway, the point of these stories, the point of all of these stories is, there's Americana Mesiras Nefesh. There is America Mesiras Nefesh. There is America Mesiras. This story with Morocco is such a crazy story, where the Rebbe was fighting with the person paying his bills and saying, you're going to write the check, you're going to pay the bills, and you're going to support your organization the way I want. And he doesn't agree. Und hat ausgeführt. The Rebbe hat ausgeführt exactly the Rebbe wanted. That's what happened. It took 2 years. And Shlomo Matasov didn't have that much nerve. The Rebbe had that much nerve. The Rebbe understood this, what has to be, it has to be. This is, it says in Sfarim, it's brought in Chassidus, but in the Siches, that the Hayom Me'el Muskanim Anasim. You all know these titles. Hayom Me'el Muskanim Anasim. So it says in Kisvei Arizal, Hayom Me'el Muskanim, when a special day comes, when a Yom Tov comes, Purim, Chanukah, Pesach, and so on, and you mention it. You don't let it pass. You're not yoyed to the Yom Tov with eating kugel. You remember the Yom Tov. And you remember the Toichen of the Yom Tov, the Pnimius of the Yom Tov, the Inyan of the Yom Tov, the Neshama of the Yom Tov. So then, V'nasim, it happens for you. We're Farbrengen Yud Tammuz. Yud Tammuz is really, it's a Yom Tov of Mesiras Nefesh. You know that, you need the politics. When the Frierdiker Rebbe came out, when the Frierdiker Rebbe announced that Yud Tammuz is a Yom Tov, the entire Jewish world endorsed it. There are many people who would love to take those endorsements back, but it's kind of late because it was in the paper. All the Gedei Yisrael, from the Chassidim and from the Mesnagdim and from the Sfardim, all declared that Yud Beis Tammuz is a Yom Tov. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter the following year, Yud Beis Tammuz Tafshin Ches, 1928. And he wrote that there's a Yom Tov, a Chag Agul of Yud Beis Gimel Tammuz, Yud Beis Tammuz, Gimel Tammuz. And he wrote the famous words that all of us know. That Lo Yossi B'vad Gol HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Gimel Yud Beis Tammuz Ela Kol Mechabe V'Teiro Mitzvah V'Afilu V'Ad Asher B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna. The Geula of Yud Beis Tammuz is for all those who love Torah mitzvahs, until such people whose entire identity as a Jew is a Shem Yisrael Yechuna. And they never talked about Salat as a nickname. It's not even their primary self-identity. It's a secondary identity. Yud Beis Tammuz, there was redemption for every Jew. We Farbrengen Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, the Mesiras Nefesh. How do Americans talk about Mesiras Nefesh? We don't know what it means. What's Mesiras Nefesh? A little iskafia. What's Mesiras Nefesh? What's Mesiras Nefesh? And the answer is, what do I know? But the answer is principle. The answer is, we're Chassidim, we have a Rebbe. And the Rebbe teaches us, how it works after Gimel Tammuz. Whatever you want, the Rebbe said. Whatever you hold, you have a raya from a sikha, from a letter, from a yechidus, I had a Rosh Hashiva. I got nicht gedrikte. Who in 770? Nicht gedrikte, Pakas, nicht gedrikte, nicht gedrikte, Samach Tzedek, nicht gedrikte. In all nicht gedrikte, it's not printed. Nicht gedrikte. Nicht gedrikte meant ja gedrikt. He wanted to squeeze in a svara, nicht gedrikte. So everyone's nicht gedrikte. You can make the Rebbe say whatever you want him to say. There's a Jew whose name is Avi Rattenberg. He's from a Yid, not a chassid at all. He's a very, very talented man, and he has records, songs that he's. And his songs are very tasteful, they're very special, they're very deep. So one of his songs is, Father, please tell me, what do I believe? That's the title. Father, please tell me, what do I... A child is saying to his father, don't tell me what you believe, tell me what I believe. In other words, whatever you tell me is my belief. Father, please tell me, what do I believe? That's the chorus. And the father answers his son. The son says to the father, Father, please tell me, what do I believe? Was glaub ich? Whatever you tell me is truth. Whatever you tell me, I believe. But tell me, please tell me, what do I believe? That's the song. And then I forgot the song. The chorus. The chorus is very powerful. So we have, Rebbe, please tell me, what do I believe? The Torah of the Rebbe, the Hadrach of the Rebbe, and this Nakuda, you see, this point that the Rebbe provides principle, Ikaron, principle, and that this principle goes till Mesiras Nefesh. For this principle we die. I'm sorry for saying those words. For this principle we don't bend. The Rebbe teaches us what a chassid is, what a fruma yid is, what a chassid is, and this idea you don't want to bend. And ultimately, there is a point where these beliefs, where these philosophies, where these priorities, where these actions come from a place that you can't defend it, you can't prove it. You just know, if you're a real chassid and you truly want to know what the Rebbe wants from us, you know what the Rebbe wants. That truth is what separates a chassid from a chassid. It what makes a chassid, and it really is the story of Yud Thomas. We're living in a time where you can do whatever you want. I don't say it. There's no nice way to say it. V'hi b'meit shveit hasheftim, by yamam ha'eim ein melach ba'aretz ish kol hayosha be'ein av yaseh. You can do whatever you want. But you don't want to do whatever you want. You want to do what David wants, what the Rebbe wants. And the Rebbe teaches us how to think. The Rebbe teaches us where the sky is, the truth is. And it's an avoid on each one of us to embrace the Rebbe's beliefs. What the Rebbe teaches, I believe. What the Rebbe prioritizes, I prioritize. And it's expensive. It's not for free. In America, we want to say, if I'm a Chassidish Yid, I should get paid for it. If I'm a Fruma Yid, I should be honored for it. But that's the way it works. The way it works is as cost. I'm a Mashiach kumen, but again, my yashikeach for Mesiras Nefesh. In Golos, it's expensive. You give your children a Jewish education, and you absolutely, the Rebbe spoke about, the Rebbe didn't mean it literally, but the Rebbe spoke about an American-born child speaking English with an accent. He was making a point. It's not important. But that it's not important is very important. If your kid speaks English well, no, he'll be a good shliach, a nice guy. But it's the hashkafa, the hadracha, the teachings, the approach to living that the Rebbe provides is chassidus. It's primus HaTorah. It's emes lamite. And it's on us to ask the question, what does the Rebbe believe in each real question in our life? How we get married, and how we build our home, and how we have our children, and how we raise our children, and what we do with our life. This is Americana Mesiras Nefesh. Americana Mesiras Nefesh is finding out what are the values that we were given, and what are the values that we're given to this day, and to live by those values. To not say, everybody else is doing kach v'kach. I heard a story, it really upsets me. The story upsets me, but I read maybe even, that Harav Gringlas, who was about Yeshurim Neiroim, his life was, he had a great sense of humor, he was always laughing, but he did not have an easy life. He had several children. His wife was a Montreal-born girl. But clearly her parents were about Mesiras Nefesh. He took such a chassan. He took a chassan from Elam HaMalbush, from Ak, from Akudim, not from Elmader. So they must have been very special people. And Harav Gringlas was a makucha to the Rebbe without any constraints. And she wanted it to learn the Mudichol. In Montreal those days, the yeshiva had secular learning. And they came as a couple to the Rebbe in Yechidus. I read it. I think I read it. Could be even it's in his book. And Rabbi Gringles was saying to his wife, the Rebbe doesn't want the children with the And she said, but so-and-so did it, and so-and-so did it, and so-and-so did it. And she said the names of all the great Chassidim in Montreal. And the Rebbe said, all those people did not listen to what I want. Do you want to be like them? That's what the Rebbe said. All of those people did not listen to what I want. You also don't want to listen to me. It's very painful. It's very painful. It's painful. Why it's not for the... It's powerful. It's powerful. It's a Stellen Leben. You know, it's an approach. This is American Yibis Tammuz. American Yibis Tammuz is to know what the Rebbe wants. I have a speech that I give by every Farbrengen. Sooner or later I'm going to get to this speech. So I'll give it now, but it's relevant l'nyanenu, you know. That it's such a yesod, and unfortunately, you see it b'muchash. You see it in, just walk the streets of Crown Heights. This you could see with your eyes. Moshe Yes, you know Moshe Yes is Yishtarben, Olav Shalom. He was a Baal Tshuva who was very talented, and he wrote music. He was a guitarist. He wrote music. And he's a pretty famous, he's a ganz geschmack, he's geschmack, yeah. But I don't think anybody's going to question that the Song of Songs of Moshe Yes is My Zayde. It's an unbelievable, My Zayde, you know My Zayde? You know My Zayde? And it's the back of the bench, you look for My Zayde. It's so poignant, it's so powerful. It's a story, he wrote, Moshe Yes would probably be now around 70, I'm going to figure. Which means he was born... What are we holding now? He was born in the 40s, the 50s, 40s. But he knew Yidden, even if they were not from, they spoke Yiddish, they talked with their hands, they ate lax and bagels. They were very traditional Jews. In other words, his parents, my Zaydi, could have literally been his Zayda. Today, a Freya Yid, a Nishka Froma Yid, der Weile, is 4th or 5th generation. The Yiddish Adoiris. The typical American Jew today, the word Jew has no meaning at all, no meaning. Their grandparents heard from their grandparents that if they intermarry, they're going to kill them, or kill themselves, or take them out of the will. You're talking now 5, 6 generations of secular Jews. They verstehen the word Jew, if not for the Torah that's going on, it's so, has no meaning. It doesn't have any meaning. But when Moshe Yes was a kid, it had a lot of meaning. If they see B'shaynis and B'shaynis, there's a lot of meaning. So he has this song where the Zaydi lives with them, and the Zaydi is from, and the Zaydi goes to shul, and the Zaydi learns Torah, and the Zaydi teaches the children Torah, and the grandchildren Torah. And then the Zaydi dies. And then, you know the song, you know Moshe has a song. No, before that. I came back, they told me Zaydi is gone, all his books were stashed and stowed away. The song is the next words. I don't know how or why it came to be. It happened slowly over many years. We just stopped being Jewish like my Zaydi was, and no one cared enough to shed a tear. What are these words? Are what the Rebbe called, I heard this from Rabbi Edelman, the American Holocaust. The Nazis killed us. America gave us the slow death, the death from frost. Most Jews in America did not fry out because of conscientious objection, because they were dissidents. They don't know why. They just didn't care enough. In other words, they didn't become fry. They poshet stopped being from. They poshet. We just stopped being Jewish like my Zaydi was. Nobody was there to say, excuse me, bist a Yid. But a Yid has to invest in being a Yid. It was just one of those things. They were Jewish, but we didn't get around to it. Last year we did it, and this year we couldn't make it. Why? We had another event. It didn't. Nobody went away from Yiddishkeit. Yiddishkeit just dissipated. It thinned out and it thinned out and it thinned out and it was gone. In other words, millions of Jews became frei for no reason other than that nobody cared. What's the beginning of it? What's the beginning? What is the beginning? The beginning of it is Jews for the first time in hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, we're living in a country where they're not hated. If I say this name by Shteibel, I'll get lynched, but I'll say it anyway because it's about this. It's about Laila. American Goyim are not anti-Semites. If you want to see anti-Semitism, go to Europe. American Goyim are not anti-Semitic. They're very nice people. They're simple people. They're stupid, but they're not bad. Sometimes stupid is worse than bad. Americans are idiots, but they're not schlechte Menschen. They're not. The Rebbe said about American Goyim, Chassidim Salem. The Rebbe said American, all of them, Chassidim Salem. They're not bad people. All the Americans want, they should be like them. Jews came to this country, and for the first time in hundreds of years, they were able to live normal, not in fear, not in poverty, not with the just expectation of violence. And it was a mechaya. Me can arbeiten, me can verdienen, me can wachsen, you could establish yourself and you could grow. And your children, the American dream, your children have a better life than you, v'chuli. That's what it was. So the attitude was, I want to have a good life. Now, is it a crime to want to have a good life? It's not a crime. But I want to have a good life became so important that they Pasha didn't get around to Torah mitzvahs. Torah mitzvahs for so many American Jews became the thing you do because your father did. The nice house is yours. The new suit is yours. The rest of it you could afford in Eden is yours. But the Pesach Seder, grandma did it. And the young generation, it wasn't important. Why? They were busy. They were busy making a life. Machalem. Did Rabbi say machalem? Machalem. So the assimilation wasn't done. It was simply not fought against. You should know you have the same thing in the Nusach of Chassidim. From Yidden. 60 years ago, in the 1960s. Yeah. How big was the Frum community in New York? How big? It was big, but it wasn't like today. If you were a Frum Yid 60 years ago, especially if you were not a liberal, if you were a conservative, you were a B'Mesiras Nefesh. Frum Yidden in the even in the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, that finished. If you were from and you were willing to be different, that you were going to have, misnagdim shaved, but they had payas that was so religious they might as well had beards, they were so, it was briske payas. If you were from a Yid 60 years ago, you were a B'Mesiras Nefesh. Otherwise, you were part of the ether, you were part of the, we do it, but don't get excited. It's not that important. A scratch on a car is important. But the mezuzah is nicht so wichtig. If the mezuzah is going to make a scratch on the wall, you don't need the mezuzah. Why? The house has to be beautiful. Yeah, it's nice. My grandfather had a mezuzah. I'm going to have a mezuzah. Today you have the same thing. Nusach Chassidim. Baruch Hashem. It's come to pass that we have reached a Maimon and Matziv where there's a lot of people who have done very well for themselves, and all they say is, I want a good life. I want a good life. I'm a Chassidish Yid. We're talking about. The Nekud is this. The Nakuda is this. I told it to the girls. I teach in seminary. So they always ask me to speak at the graduation. So I spoke this year at the graduation. I said that the Rebbe Rashab made yeshiva Temchat Mimim. And when he made the yeshiva, he spoke a sikha that defined the mandate of the yeshiva. And the mandate of the yeshiva is called a Yetzel Mechames Beis David, get kisses case of L'ishtay. If you want to go fight the war to bring Mashiach to Ken, you have to be prepared to divorce yourself from Gashmias. Everybody knows the Sikha, everyone talks about the Sikha, and everyone pats themselves on the back and called themselves a big chassid and a big tamim. I said to the girls, a lot of people forgot that in that Gemara, in that Sikha, there's the word Milchama. It's a war. It's a war. If you are a young couple, you're so old, you're young again, yeah. But I'm marrying off my kids, but my children, they're friends. If you want a Hasidic house in America, you have to fight. And the kids are saying, how much are you going to fight? Well, the answer is, till Mashiach comes. The fight never finishes. In Russia, they fought because the guy was trying to kill him. In America, you have to fight because the guy wants to be your friend. And you have to fight. if you stop fighting, this is the story. You don't become frei. It just gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. Pshara equals compromise equals compromise. You don't even watch. That's what the Hayim Yem says. Eideva says nidirik and grob is the shmargish, the egen and nidirikait, and the egen and grobkeit. And the answer to all of this is Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz. The Frierdiker Rebbe was a person who fought for Yiddishkeit. Period. That was it. It was simple. And he taught Chassidim, he taught us, that in Golos it's a fight. Yeah, we live in America. We don't have to fight with anybody in America. And the answer is you have to fight against the enemy that's not fighting with you. And it's the hardest enemy to fight with. When the guy says, I hate you. You know, there's a famous video you could see. There's different versions of it. Yehuda Avner tells the story in his book and in his videos. And then you can actually see, what's his name? Yitzhak Rabin tell the story. But everyone tells the story the way they want to make themselves look good or look bad, whatever the particulars are. But the story was, Yitzhak Rabin was the Israeli ambassador to Washington, D.C. Yitzhak Rabin was a very special man. He's one of the founders of Eretz Yisrael, one of the founding fathers. He was a general. He fought in all Israeli wars. He loved Israel. He loved Jews. But he was really very frei. He wasn't like Ben Gurion who went to Cheder. He was a Sabra. He was born in Israel. He never saw Yiddishkeit. Never. I think Moshe Dayan was in the same class. The first founders, the first fathers of the modern state went to Cheder as children. The second generation didn't. They were born in Israel. And Yehuda Avner, who, I mean, you have to listen to him talk. He was a closet chassid, very much wanted Rabin to meet the Rebbe. And he was his assistant. He was in Washington with him. And he spoke to Rabbi about coming to New York and seeing the Rebbe. And Rabbi said, just bug off. Like, leave me alone. It wasn't even worth saying a dirty word for, you know. So what did he do, Yehuda Avner? Yehuda Avner was a frum man. He was frum. He called up Shazar. He said to Shazar, who I don't know how frum he was, but he was certainly a big chassid, that soon as the Rebbe's 70th birthday, and he thinks that it's appropriate that Shazar should send a personal emissary to wish the Rebbe greetings on his 70th birthday. And Shazar said, a moidendik idea, but who am I going to send? So Yehuda said, what do you think about sending Yitzhak Rabin? So Yitzhak Rabin gets a message from the president of Israel that he's going to be the official representative of the president of the country to travel to New York to give the Rebbe greetings on his birthday. And Rabin wanted to kill him. And he understood that Yehuda Avner, the ganze Meise Be'arbet, the whole thing was a setup, but he had to do it. So he says to Yehuda Avner, okay, fine, I'm going to do it. A few conditions. Number one, I'm not meeting the Rebbe at night, I'm meeting him during the day. Number two, I'm not waiting. I'm sorry, I'm a dignitary. The Rebbe has to see me right away. Number three, no press. Sure. Anyway, he came during the day. The Rebbe made him wait for 2 hours, and there was tons of press. The only condition that he actually kept was that he came during the day. And his pictures were sitting in mosquitoes, talking to different people. He went into the Rebbe. Now, what you don't know from Rabin's interview, you have to read Yehuda Avner's book. Rabin was not impressed with the Rebbe until the Rebbe started talking to the military. Until the Rebbe spoke about the situation in the 6-Day War, he was freaked out how the Rebbe understood. The Rebbe understood the sources of the war, the cause of the war. But this conversation started ideologically. Now, when you listen to Yitzhak Rabin tell the story, he talks about all the philosophy. What you don't know is that it didn't move him. Yehuda Avner says, I'm telling you that he wasn't impressed until the Rebbe started talking about the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean. The Rebbe asked him pointedly, how does he feel as a kifsa achas ben shivim ze'evim in Washington, D.C.? How does it feel to be one nation against the whole world in Washington? You know what he told the Rebbe? You know what he told the Rebbe? I don't feel that way. You know, he walked right into the Rebbe's trap. He told the Rebbe, excuse me, Rabbi, you're old-fashioned. We are the modern state of Israel. and there's 100 and so many nations in the United Nations, and one of them is the state of Israel, where the nation called Allah. I feel just as comfortable in Washington as the Bangladeshi and the Indian and the Khvaisvas and the Mongolian and the Chinese and the Korean. Anyway, so the Rebbe had to push him. And they had a whole conversation, and the Rebbe asked him point blank, Jewish people survive because of anti-Semitism or because of ideology? And he apparently did not answer the question, and the Rebbe told him it's a combination of the Goy fortifies the Jew by hating him, plus the ideology. Now what the Rebbe was really saying is, if you take away one of those two things, being frum becomes very tricky. And the Rebbe was telling him that to a great extent, the pressure of anti-Semitism has been lifted, so the obligation of inner motivation becomes much more important. And this is, you want to know, Kostas Lamoyer. That's what this means. You know, I'm a teacher, and I talk to people, and I've been doing it for a long time. And people tell me all the time, Rabbi, my kids are not going to go through what I went through. There's a lot of Targum, a lot of Rashis and Tosfos and Mefarshim on those words. My children are not going to go through it. Some of them mean we're not going to have 50 kids because the kids are going to be neglected and ignored. Some say we're not going to be poor. Some say I'm not going to let kids go to school where the teachers are going to hit them. Some say I'm not going to go to school where my parents are going to be fanatic religious and angry and hypocrites and make us nervous that we're going to be calm and collected and chilled. Fine. And you know what? Gesundheit. You don't want your kids to have your life, fine. But just answer me one question. What do you want them to have? They can't have a negative. You can't raise your kids on, I'm not going to give them this. Tell me how you're going to raise your children. Was wirst du sie geben? The way you were raised was too religious, too extreme, too impoverished, too nervous, too intense. Fine, fine. But tell me, and most of the young people don't have an answer to that question. That's Moshe Yes's singing. There's not enough invested in Yiddishkeit, and for us, there's not enough invested in Chassidus. You don't decide not to be a Chassid. You just stop trying to be a Chassid. And this is Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz is that until Mashiach comes, a Jew is fighting a war. Whether he lives in Russia, or he lives in New York, or he lives in London, he lives in Israel, lives in the holiest places in the world, we are fighting a war with the Yetzer Hara, and we have an obligation to make this an ikir. It's a priority in our life that we stand for principles. The world says like this, and we say different. The world says this is how you raise Jewish children, and we say different. That's the whole idea. In other words, the relationship between us and Yud Beis Tammuz is that there is still a truth. The truth is, it's a chayvas gavra. It's an obligation, each individual person, to understand that there's a war being fought, and I am a warrior. Maybe I'm not a shliach, maybe I don't work with other people. I have a wife, I have children. In my home, I have to represent, I have to be my Zaidi. You know, it's heresy to say, but everybody thinks it. You have to just change the word. Instead of my Zaidi, say my Rebbe. Who is going to be the Rebbe of my children? If not me. Who is going to be the Rebbe of children? If not we. What does that mean? I have to speak the truth. I have to fight for what's right, even if it's not popular and it's not cool and it's not chilled. The kids say, don't be nervous. My father gets nervous. He says, be nervous. I'm a nervous guy by nature. On my kids. Yeah. So I asked somebody once, I want to ask you a question. When a kid runs into the street and you grab him and you yank him onto the sidewalk, are you nervous? He says, yeah. But you're supposed to be chilled. He says, no, I want to be nervous. I wanted to see her. So you know what? Carrying on Shabbos is as serious as running into a street. Your kid has to see that you're nervous about Shabbos. Your kid has to see you're nervous about Cholavakum. You're nervous about Pasakum and Bishalakum. Your children have to see that this is important. This is the reality of Yud Beis Tammuz. This is us. And this is Americana Mesiras Nefesh. And the younger the children are, I mean, The kids who are getting married, when they establish their home, everybody knows that sich. What's the Rebbe saying? You were not chilled about Yiddishkeit. Are you chilled about your parnasa, or your parnasa you're worried about? Are you chilled about your health? Or it's earnest. Okay. Anyway, everybody got the point. We all the point. Each one of us, beginning with myself, this is Americana Mesiras Nefesh is. The Mesiras Nefesh in America is that we ask ourselves this simple question. Father, please tell me, what do I believe? Rebbe, please tell me, what do I believe? I think we know what we believe. And those values are our values. And those values we give our children. And we get nervous about them. Why? Because it's important. L'chaim.